Happy Valentine's Day, happy Valentine's Day, my beautiful people. Happy Valentine's Day. Today we are going to be talking on the reasons why you feel that you are pregnant, but when you do a pregnancy test, it comes out negative. Reasons why a test is negative, but you have all signs of pregnancy. So we are going to be talking on that this morning, because a lot of people have been having issues with this and they don't really understand how it happens. They don't really understand what is happening. So we are going to be looking on two things that are involved when it comes to false positive and false negative. So the two things involved is false negative tests and actual negative tests. There's a difference between a false negative test and an actual negative test. So now with a false negative test, what can make a test to be negative when you are actually pregnant? That's a false negative. What can make a test to be negative when actually you are pregnant? There are some factors that determines it. There are some factors that determine a false negative test. Like we said, a false negative test is when you make a pregnancy test, it shows negative, whereas you are actually pregnant. There are some certain things to take into consideration. The first thing is the timing of the test. When did you make that test? At what time was that test conducted? If you do a test very early, you will experience a false negative very early, in the sense that you have not yet missed your period and you are already taking a test, a pregnancy test. It is certain, the probability is high that you experience a false negative test, meaning you are actually pregnant, but at that time you experience a false negative test. It is always advisable that you take a test after you have missed your period. Don't do a test when you've not missed your period. Meaning, don't do a test before the expected date of the menses. Wait that expected date to pass before you conduct a pregnancy test. Also, it's advisable that if you do that test 5 days before missing your period, high chances are that you will have about 50% chance that test will be positive. So it is advisable you wait until you miss your period before you conduct a pregnancy test. Also, if you do a pregnancy test as early as say 2 weeks after your ovulation, there's high probability that the amount of HCG is a hormone responsible for pregnancy, gonadotrophic hormone. If you do that test early, there is high probability that the amount of that hormone in urine is very low. It's very low, meaning the pregnancy strip, the urine test strip might not be able to pick to detect the presence of that hormone. That hormone is the one that detects that there is pregnancy. So that test might not be able to detect the presence of that hormone, and definitely you have a false negative test. The second factor we need to take into consideration before we conduct a pregnancy test is the menstrual cycle. A lot of women do not know their menstrual cycle. And by so doing, they conduct a test early before their expected date. It is very necessary that you understand your menstrual cycle. Know how many days you have. A lot of women assume that they have a 28-day cycle, whereas some of them have a 32-day cycle. So if you have a 32-day cycle and when it is day 28, you start conducting a test expecting that your menses was supposed to have started, whereas you still have about 4 days ahead for that menses or 5 days ahead for it to come, there is high probability that you have a false negative test. The next factor we need to also take into consideration is urine. Urine, what you use, because most of us do the urine test at home. Most of us, it's very normal that most of us, the home test we do is a urine test. So the next factor we should take is a urine. You need to take into consideration that early urine, you need to know that early urine has a lot of that hormone in it because it has accumulated throughout the night. So that is why it's always advisable that you should use early urine to conduct your pregnancy test. If you fail to use your early urine, it is also advisable that you wait for 2 hours after drinking water. You give a space of 2 hours. You don't drink any water within that space of 2 hours so that the amount of the hormone will be higher. Because if you take water within that 2 hours, you dilute the hormone. You dilute it, so you will not be able, the strip might not be able to pick that test. You will not be able to detect the presence of that hormone in the urine, and by so doing, you have a false negative test. The next thing is a mistake we do while taking the test. A lot of us will do a lot of mistakes. We don't read the instructions on the test strip. It is advisable that every test strip you buy, read the instruction on the package. Read it. Make sure that you are following the instruction on the test strip. If the test strip says dip the strip in urine, dip it in urine. If it says put 3 to 5 drops of urine, put 3 to 5 drops of urine. Each test comes with its own unique instructions, so we should follow the instructions. And also there's a line in that test strip, it is called the max. You should not dip that strip above, urine should not go above that line. If urine goes above that line, you have a false negative test. It might even be invalid because you have gone against the instructions of that test strip. The next thing also is consider the expiry date. The expiry date of that strip is very, very important. Always check the expiry date. If that test strip has expired, it is not going to work. It is not going to detect the presence of that hormone, and you have an invalid test. You have a false negative test. Now, let's look at the actual negative result. The first things we were looking at were in the case of you are actually pregnant and you are having a negative result. Those are some of the things that can cause you to experience a negative result whereas you are actually pregnant. So now, in case where you are actually negative, you are not pregnant, what can be the cause of you having that negative result? What can be the cause of you not being able to get pregnant? The first thing is that you have an irregular menstrual cycle. You have an irregular menstrual cycle. So you need to check your menstrual cycle. You need to calculate it to be sure if you have a regular or an irregular menstrual cycle. And if you do have an irregular menstrual cycle, there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that can be the cause. There are a lot of things. For example, if you are suffering from PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, it might be the cause of you having that irregular menstrual cycle. If you are suffering from hormonal imbalances, it might be the cause of that irregular menstrual cycle. Also, you need to check if you are on any hormonal contraceptive. If you are doing any family planning, which is a hormonal contraceptive, it will cause you to have an irregular menstrual cycle and you will have a negative result, a negative pregnancy result. Another thing is premenopausal women. Premenopausal women will always face that irregular menstrual cycle, whereas you'll be expecting that you are supposed to menstruate at this time and the menses will not come because you are experiencing an irregular menstrual cycle. Another big factor that will cause your menses to delay or to experience irregular cycle is anxiety. With anxiety, when you are anxious to get pregnant, you start having the characteristics of pregnancy. You start having the signs and symptoms of pregnancy. It is anxiety. The anxiety hormones look like the pregnancy hormones. So when they are present, you start having those characteristics, whereas you are not pregnant, you are actually negative. So these are some of the things, these are some of the factors that will cause you to have a false negative or an actual negative pregnancy test. If you have come this far with this video, it shows that you are liking it. So I encourage you to either subscribe to my channel so that you always be notified whenever I post any new video. This channel will talk a lot on health, reproduction, and everything that has to do with child conception.